Greetings, everyone. I'm Michael Chapnick here in Singapore with the APEC Secretariat. I'd like to thank everyone for joining this briefing today. Malaysia, as host of APEC 2020, has recently announced the dates for the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting in November. It comprises several technical meetings, a ministerial meeting, APEC CEO dialogue, and some technical meetings. I'm glad that we have 4 esteemed panelists here today to discuss more details about APEC Economic Leaders Week, the work of APEC amid the COVID-19 pandemic, and some logistical details going forward. Each panelist will give remarks and a presentation, and we'll have a session for Q&A afterward. We'd like to thank everyone who submitted questions in advance via email and the registration link. We've received a great number of questions from all of you, and we'll try our best to answer these during the Q&A. Before we start, let me remind everyone of some housekeeping details for this virtual format. First of all attendees are on mute. We have a Q&A tool at the bottom of the page. We encourage you to go there to submit your questions if you haven't submitted one already. Please advise of any technical issues via the chat function with a direct message to the APEC Secretariat, and we'll get in touch. Note that we are recording the session. Now, let's get started. First, we'll hear from Dr. Rebecca Santamaria, the Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat. She'll provide global context for the APEC Economic Leaders Week and what APEC hopes to achieve. Over to you, Dr. Santamaria.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening if you're in different time zones. Happy to have you all join us. I think this is an important briefing to start the Leaders Week to bring everybody up to speed on what we intend to do. This Leaders Week will be, in a sense, historic because it'll be the first one that we will be doing completely virtually, and also the focus on COVID-19 and its impact on all our economies, and more importantly, when the leaders meet, there will be quite a bit of focus on the post-pandemic recovery work, as well as looking at the resilience of the APEC as a whole. We can expect that when the leaders meet, and I know Dr. Rohana and Hyril, the SOM chair, will provide us more details, while Dr. Dennis Hugh, the director of our policy support unit, will walk us through some economic data that will be useful for all of us as we try and put this whole period in a context that we can appreciate the challenges that we will be facing, that we are facing, that we will need to overcome as we move forward and look at recovery. My second point is about the multilateral cooperation. What has come true in this period is how we have banded together, and the process of APEC has continued. The work that we're doing in APEC has continued regardless of the challenges that we face. We've managed to successfully have a series of discussions, dialogues, and meetings using the virtual format, using digital platform. It is interesting that APEC had a very strong focus on the digital economy, and in a sense it's come home to roost when we are seeing how we've had to resort to technology to bring us together, to continue to have us collaborate in this environment. So really driving home the importance of looking at digital economy, and that's high on our agenda, whether it's the policymakers' perspective or the business perspective. So that's the second point. I think that's important to note. We've had a number of ministerial meetings successfully conducted, sharing of best practices in the face of this pandemic, how each economy has met the challenges and tried their best to overcome those challenges. So that's an important takeaway from this period. And finally, the whole idea of how we're going to manage COVID-19. This will be high on the agenda when the leaders meet, as we come to the end of Malaysia's year, a very challenging year for Malaysia, and I'm sure Hyril and Dr. Rohana will give us more insights into some of the challenges and what we will in spite of those challenges, the opportunities that we've had to build resilience, as it were, as a group. So those are some of the areas I think we will be focused on, and we will see us moving forward stronger in spite of the challenges that were thrown at us, unexpected as it was, and how we rose as a grouping. We rose to the challenge. We built our own resilience right from the get-go, and made sure that everything that we planned, yes, not quite there, but we managed to achieve a significant amount of what we set out to do. I think, Michael, I'll stop here. Happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Santa Maria, for setting the scene. Next up, we'll hear from Dr. Dennis Hugh, who's the director of the APEC Policy Support Unit. He'll discuss the APEC, the economic challenges in the region, and his advice for the forum. Over to you, Dennis.
Yeah, all right. Let me just put up my PowerPoint presentation. Right. Right, thank you. So I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes to share with you an economic and trade update for the APEC region. You'll find that based on our latest forecast numbers, the APEC region is projected to contract by 2.5% in 2020, which translates to an output loss of about $1.8 trillion US. Now that's a slightly less contraction estimate than our forecast in July, partly because we are seeing the earlier than expected easing of lockdowns, particularly in the second quarter of the year, and we can beginning to see some improvements and some early signs of economic recovery once we look at some of the economic numbers, particularly from the middle of the year. Near-term growth outlook will hinge on a couple of factors, three factors: resurgence of COVID-19 infections. Unfortunately, beginning to see that we're seeing a second wave of these infections in Europe, for example. There's also the effective responses by policymakers, both fiscal, monetary, as well as trade, in terms of containing the pandemic. Also rising uncertainties, particularly on the negative spillover effects from reduced global demand. Some of the concerns that have been highlighted by us as well as by others is in terms of economic scarring, long-term unemployment, its impact on businesses as well as other forms of investments. We can see for the first half of this year, from January to June, it gives you a kind of a preview on the kind of contraction we'll be seeing for the full year. In terms of GDP numbers, we're looking at about 3.7% compared to 3.4% in the corresponding January to June the previous years. Consumption itself, which has been an important driver for the region, has also contracted by 7.1%. We're seeing that impact of lockdowns in the first quarter and second quarter having that impact on consumer spending as well as other forms of consumption. We also see that investments have also contracted quite significantly by about 11.2%. In fact, UNCTAD has projected that FDI inflows, particularly to the region, to Asia, is going to be, and to the rest of the world, will contract something like 40%. But we also begin to see the responses by various governments in addressing the pandemic, and we see an increase in different types of policy measures, and that's led to an increase in government consumption to about 2.8% versus 2.6% the previous year. Again, we see that reflection of that contraction in GDP growth reflected in both in merchandise trade, both in exports and imports, and we can see those contraction numbers both in value as well as in terms of volume. The WTO forecast that global trade is expected to contract by about 12.9%, 9.2% this year, with a rebound in 2021 by about 7.2%. Again, those contractions in merchandise trade numbers we see here in a way has been reflecting that impact of disruptions in supply chains as well as trade tensions. In fact, trade performance has already beginning to slow down even before the pandemic, partly because of concerns of trade tensions, rising trade tensions. Compounding that contraction in trade, we see commercial services, essentially the numbers have plunged. You can see here both in terms of exports and imports of commercial services, more than 20% contraction numbers for the first half of this year. And of course, the most affected would be in services sector, those with particularly those with what we call person-to-person contact. Travel and tourism are the most affected by these lockdowns and restrictions and movements. We're looking at international tourist arrivals plunging by about 65% in the first half of this year, and that translates to a loss in revenue of about 460 billion US dollars. Now, the next two slides are really looking at some of our findings on the Bogle Goals final review, which the Policy Support Unit has been assisting senior officials and the Committee for Trade Investments in that. So that report is about to be finalized soon, but some of our initial findings are seen here. We see that the trade liberalization has progressed quite significantly in the APEC region. We see average MFN tariff rates have been falling from about 13.9% in 1994 when the Bogle Goals was launched to about currently about 5.25%, 5 to 5.2% this year, last year in 2019. But we see that trade liberalization itself has been quite uneven. We find that the agriculture tariffs continue to be quite much higher than non-agriculture. As of 2019, the agriculture tariffs are about 11.6% compared to the non-agriculture sector. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We also find that non-tariff measures, or NTMs for short, continues to be highly prevalent in the region, and we have and also worrying signs that have been increasing over the last couple of years. That said, that we are observing that there have been an increase in trade facilitation measures since the pandemic started, particularly though measures that would facilitate trade in essential goods, medical supplies, medicines, as well as protection equipment, PPE for short. However, some of these new temporary export restrictions and prohibitions continue to be in place in some APEC, particularly for medicines and other things. So that's something to take into account. So this chart is I think was quite important to indicate that the pandemic is not over yet. In many economies in APEC, they've been successful in containing the first wave of infections, but the number of infections and the number of deaths continue to be quite high. Daily new cases continue to be over 50,000. I think the numbers that I have, the total number of cases in the APEC region total up to about 12.5 million cases, with deaths about a little over 400,000. So this is my final slide, and just to indicate, as I mentioned, that the pandemic is not over yet, and there are concerns, of course, as we move forward on the concerns of a second wave of infections, which we are beginning to see in different parts of the world, for example, in Europe, and we see partial lockdowns again being implemented in that part of the world. So absence of an effective vaccines that's going to be rolled out, which we think hopefully will be sometime next year. I think economies in the APEC region as well as in the rest of the world will have to grapple with a number of trade-offs. I mean, prolonged movement restrictions or lockdowns that may risk long-term economic scarring, concerns scarring in terms of long-term unemployment, its impact or on businesses. Reopening the economy also runs the risk of a resurgence of infections, which in turn could have an impact on consumption and investments. Economies itself would greatly benefit from the extension on fiscal, monetary measures that would support the healthcare systems, as well as households, businesses, as well as micro, small, medium enterprises. So the downside risk itself and uncertainties continues to be something that we need to look out for as we move ahead. But there are also opportunities to build more resilient economies as well as to strengthen supply chains. So these are some things that we think it's important to take note of. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for the insightful overview of the region's economic trends and trade trends. We look forward to the full APEC regional trends analysis next month. Just a reminder to please send your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, not through the chat function. Thank you. Next up, we'll hear from our host for APEC 2020, represented by Malaysia's Deputy Secretary General of Trade, Mr. Hairil Yari Yaakob, who will discuss APEC's theme for 2020 and priorities, as well as logistical arrangements, major policy issues, and expected deliverables for APEC Economic Leaders Week. Over to you, Mr. Hairil.
Thank you, Michael. Firstly, I would like to thank the Secretariat in Singapore for organizing this Economic Leaders Week media briefing, international media briefing. Thank you to you and the Secretariat. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you from different time zones from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you for inviting me as a Som chair for this year to provide updates on to media on the arrangements and deliverables of the AELM, APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, as well as the AMM, APEC Ministerial Meeting. Next, please. Okay, before I proceed, I would like to take a few minutes to provide update to the media on the approach undertaken by Malaysia after the pandemic brought our planning and organization of the physical meetings to a stop. So due to the pandemic, so it steered us, the host, towards to rethink, reanalyze, and re-strategize our efforts to deliver our responsibility as the host economy for APEC 2020. So in order for us to respond promptly and effectively against the COVID-19 crisis, so we decided that the most pragmatic way forward for our hosting is through a 3P approach, that is pivot, prioritize, and progress. So by having the pivot and prioritize lens to guide us, we had identified those APEC meetings which significantly contribute to Malaysia's priority areas and targeted deliverables. So we also adopted all the meetings in a fully virtual format throughout this year. Okay, guided by this approach, we, Malaysia, updated the team to optimizing human potential towards a resilient future of shared prosperity, pivot, prioritize, and progress. So this is to reflect the post-crisis recovery needs of the Asia-Pacific region. So we continue our meetings, the rest of our meeting this year under this, the new team. It's not really a new team, but we tweaked a team to ensure that there is element of resilience in our overall team for this year. Just to recall, that the 3 priority areas for APEC 2020 that has been agreed since December last year, 2019, when the senior officials met for the first time, it all remained the same. So we proceed to advance the deliverables accordingly under each of the priority areas. But taking into consideration of the crisis, for us to deliver the work plans under all APEC fora and sub-fora, all the deliverables, all the work plans will align accordingly to respond to the crisis. So this is what we have been doing for the past couple of months. I mean, several months since June. Okay, next please. So with regard to the prioritization exercise, you may recall that we started our year quite ambitiously in Langkawi during the informal senior officials meeting. But due to the pandemic, so we had to re-strategize the plan for the year. So the number of the meetings had to be scaled down. So we identified the meetings that will progress the work which will directly contribute towards the outcomes of the year, and we decided to proceed with it. So among these are the leaders meeting, the APEC ministerial meetings, 6 sectoral ministerial meetings, and around 50 committees, working groups meetings, and among others, fora meetings and sub-fora meetings. So far, we have successfully conducted close to 55 meetings virtually since July, when we pick up from the summit that was held in February. So in addition, this is in addition to the more than 85 meetings that we have held physically since December last year in Langkawi, and during the summit and related meetings in February in Putrajaya. So overall, we have about 140 meetings that we are going to have for this year. Now, let's turn to the AELW, APEC Economic Leaders Week. Next, please. So these are the schedule of meetings during the AELW. So it will start off with the CSOM, concluding senior officials meeting that will be held on the 11th November, followed by APEC for meeting, which I believe Dr. Rona will be elaborating later on. And then it will be proceeded with the APEC ministerial meeting, AMM, on 16th of November. And then we will have APEC CEO dialogues from 19th to 20th. And ultimately, we will have the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting on the 20th of November in a fully virtual format. So now let's go to the AMM. Yes, please. Okay. This ministerial meeting that will be convened in the Leaders Week will be chaired by my minister, who is the Senior Minister and Minister of International Trade and Industry of Malaysia, Datuk Seri Muhammad Azmin Ali. So it will be held on 16 November, 8 p.m. Kuala Lumpur time. So it's like 8 a.m. in Washington, D.C., around 12 midnight in Wellington, among others. So the meeting is expected to be participated by both the Trade and Foreign Affairs Ministers. And as this will be the precursor to the AELM, the key outcomes of this meeting will be the AMM statement, which will be the precursor to the leaders' discussion on 20th. So at the end of the meeting, the AMM chair, my minister, will be holding a press conference with all the media. Next, please. Okay, next, please. Okay, this is the key logistical details for the AELM. So as I mentioned before, it will be held on 20th of November, 8 o'clock Malaysian time. It will be chaired by my Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. The key participants will be the leaders from all 21 APEC economies, but today we haven't received any confirmation because I put the deadline next week for all the economies to confirm their participation, even though we have received indication from some economies. And our guest will be Christina Georgieva, who is the MD of the IMF, and then the format will be in fully virtual, and the number of participants per economy is 1+2. Like Dr. Tansi has mentioned, this will be the first time in APEC history AELM will be held in fully virtual format. So I'm pretty excited to wait for this moment that we can see all the economic leaders on one screen having a discussion on APEC matters, especially on the response to the COVID-19. Next, please. Okay, for the agenda of the meeting of the AELM, as mentioned by Tan Sri earlier, it will be heavily focused on the COVID-19, especially on the response by APEC economies on the health and economic impact of the COVID-19. And also, most importantly, is the launch of APEC post-2020 vision. So I expect that all the leaders will adopt the APEC 2020 post-2020 vision, which all of them will be launching at the end of the AELM. Next, please. So as mentioned, the main outcome, So the main outcome will be the post-2020 vision, which all of you know. This will be the document that will replace BOGO goals, which will provide the direction of the work of the APEC beyond 2020. So we are thinking of 20 years from now, 30 years from now. So this will be the document that will chart, that will shape our reference, our discussion for the next 20, 30 years. Another main deliverables for Malaysia, which I'm optimistic that we can achieve, is the APEC 2020 Leaders Declaration. So to me, this year's declaration is very, very crucial, very, very pertinent, because for the last couple of years, if all of you know, attempts to produce a consensus statement by APEC was unsuccessful. So, in order to ensure that we are able to attain the consensus among the economies on the declaration, the content has been curated to reflect APEC's current works in addressing the adversity, and also APEC works to accelerate the economic recovery as a result of this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. So next, please. Now, we are in my last slide. So to me, this is the most important deliverables for APEC 20, not only for Malaysia as the chair, but for the whole region, for the whole APEC economies. Because this, as I mentioned before, this is the document that will guide us for the next 20, 30 years. So Malaysia, as the pen holder of this very, very crucial document, is working tirelessly 24/7 in collaboration with all APEC economies to finalize this document. Senior officials led by me as the chair have intensified our work, and we're hoping that we can finalize this document in the coming weeks. In fact, 2 days ago, I just checked 4 hours of discussion among the senior officials in trying to finalize this document. I remember we started our meeting at 8 p.m. and we finished around 12:45 past midnight, which is like nearly 5 o'clock in the morning for our colleagues from Wellington. So I can assure you, I can reaffirm our commitment by all the senior officials, by all APEC economies, that we will come up with the APEC post-2020 vision, which is very, very important document to the region. So as the chair of SOM chair for this year, I'm working very, very hard with my colleagues, with other senior officials, in order to finalize this document in time for the ministers and the leaders to launch on 30th of November. And the spirit and determination by all senior officials is really overwhelmed me. They are very working very hard together with me in coming up with this post-2020 vision. So with that, I end my presentation. I look forward to the discussion with the media on any question that you would like to pose. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, Hairil, for the presentation. Next, we'll hear from the private sector, Dr. Rahana Mahmood, who's chair of the APEC Business Advisory Council. She will preview the business's recommendations to ministers and leaders and the APEC CEO dialogue. Dr. Rahana?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael. Good morning, good afternoon, evening. Warm greetings from Kuala Lumpur. Selamat datang. Let me very quickly acknowledge Tan Sri Rebecca, and then Hairil and Dennis. And we welcome APEC, welcomes the opportunity to brief the media on the recommendations of the APEC Business Advisory Council to the APEC leaders and ministers this year, as well as on the arrangements for the CEO dialogues to be held, as Hairil and others pointed out, 19th and 20th of November of this month. This year, aside from the usual letters and report to sectoral ministers such as trade, health, finance, food security, women, and SMEs, APEC, for the first time, produced 2 reports, the APEC COVID-19 report and the APEC report to APEC economic leaders. Now, noting the challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic to all our economies, both on the health and the economic fronts, APEC developed recommendations in relation to COVID-19 and call for APEC-wide cooperation in relation to COVID-19, in relation to access to the tools that we need to understand and combat the pandemic and mitigate the most severe economic consequences in the short term. APEC produced a COVID-19 report laying the groundwork for economic recovery and resilience, which was submitted to the APEC Ministers of Trade in July. APEC members are set to present to the respective leaders beginning next week its letter and report to the APEC economic leaders this year. In the letter and the report, we note the unprecedented challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic and highlight the need for collaboration and cooperation in order to rebuild and revitalize our economies and put them back on track to economic recovery. Drawing on the lessons of the pandemic, we outline recommendations in relation to Malaysia's 2020 year and our priorities of integration, innovation, inclusion, and sustainability. Let me just cover those areas very, very quickly. On integration, we note that free and open trade and investment is key to a return to growth. And we urge APEC leaders to prioritize pro-trade and pro-investment policies. This includes enhancing open, secure, and stable supply chains, developing and realizing this is my most favorite, a free trade area of the Asia Pacific, FTAP, and support for a well-functioning WTO. That's very clear, multilateral trading system. On innovation, we know that the pandemic has dramatically demonstrated the importance of digital innovation and the connectivity, as well as the need for robust physical infrastructure and an enabling regulatory environment to underpin the digital economy. We call on leaders to ensure that digital infrastructure, including broadband, is accessible even in the underdeveloped areas, and that the regulatory and technological environment is open, non-discriminatory, and coherent across APEC to enable innovation, interoperability, and more rapid digitalization for all. On inclusion, which is very, very key, APEC Malaysia talks about it under shared prosperity. We urge leaders to take the opportunity to provide by the pandemic to address issues of more equitable sharing of opportunities and benefits of trade and regional prosperity, including by ensuring that micro, small, medium enterprises, women, indigenous communities, and youth are not left behind. This will help to enhance our collective resilience. On sustainability, we underscore the need to take steps to reverse the dramatic decline in the health of our planet, avert crisis, and prepare for greater environmental challenges. These include strengthening international cooperation to mitigate and adapt to climate change as a matter of urgency, and to foster the transition to a low carbon economy, including by encouraging innovative solutions and the development and uptake of renewable energy. Finally, on the post-Vision 2020, which was covered extensively by High Rail, the business community, the business leaders of the Asia Pacific region, we call on leaders to adopt a post-2020 vision which ensures that free and open trade and investment, including the multilateral rules-based trading system, is able to continue to play a central role in sustainable and inclusive growth, and have at its heart the free trade area of the Asia Pacific region. And this is the logical next step to the BOGO goals. Now, and this will embody the concept of collaboration and cooperation through an Asia Pacific economic community, one which is both inclusive and resilient and ensures that sustainability, including climate change mitigation and adaptation, are explicit goals. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are also normally, in lieu of the usual APEC CEO summit that we have since 1995, I think, in lieu of the usual summit, we this year decided to hold the APEC CEO dialogues, and this will be completely, fully virtual. And we're going to hold it one day before the leader summit, so that we can have the leaders' participation. This summit is leader-centric. The theme of the summit is APEC Reimagine, Priorities in the Aftermath of COVID-19. The CEO dialogues are designed to be high-level engagement with APEC leaders. These engagements comprise of keynote addresses and conversations on APEC's priorities in the aftermath of COVID-19. We've invited 10 leaders, and I don't want to sound too confident, but we should have about 8 to 9 leaders. And we have key thought leaders, and then we'll have global CEOs participate. Thematic sessions on key issues of the day will also be considered. We have the likes of, I don't know how much you want to know, but a number of the leaders have already confirmed. On the media side, we have the likes of Farid Zakaria, who just wrote a book, and very apt and appropriate for him to come and talk to us. Now, for the media, you are most welcome to participate and to view the proceedings for 2 days. I encourage you to register your dialogues through our media partner, the Global Gateway Advisors, and then please do not hesitate to get in touch with me directly if you need to do this. So on that note, Michael, there are challenges this year, either for APEC Malaysia or APEC Malaysia, with regards to the COVID-19. challenges should also be viewed as opportunities. The Chinese character of if there's always a opportunity to do something. Now we look forward to engaging with the leaders, but at the same time, as Hyrule pointed out, this is an important year, not only because it's fully virtual, but the fact that Papua New Guinea never had a leaders declaration, neither did Chile, and Chile didn't have a meeting this year. So Malaysia, under all the odds and challenges and God knows what else, we hope we will have a good meeting, God willing, and we look forward to the support of all of you, and especially the.
Thank you, everyone. This has been this has always been planned to be a pivotal year, and it's proven to be so. We'd like to thank the panelists for your presentations today and for the journalists for your questions. If we haven't gotten to your questions, we will do our best to get back to you directly. For more information about APEC, we encourage you to follow us on social media. To request an interview, please contact us at media@apec.org. We hope that you will join us for our virtual APEC Economic Leaders Week. And thanks again for joining us. Together we can advance free trade for Asia Pacific prosperity.